I'm not ashamed to own my Lord, nor to defend his cause. Maintain the honors of his word, the glory of his cross.
All right, we're going to start in Mark 16 this morning. Just a reminder of where we finished last week. Because this group was online, we were talking about the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. We were comparing Mark's account to Matthew's account and how it's very similar. Of course, it's the same story, but that there were a few different details. And since we're going to be discussing this 4 times, what I'm trying to do is pick out certain pieces that we're going to cover so that we're not saying the same thing every time. We're going to pick out, all right, maybe some things that Mark had that Matthew did not, or things we didn't cover in Matthew that we would cover in other places. And so we got through the details of who conspired to crucify Christ, and we noted that the elders and chief priests didn't want to do it during the feast. They had said that, but then were presented with an opportunity where Judas, who wasn't there when they had started their conspiracy, Judas had come forward and gave them an opportunity to kill Jesus, and they were going to take that opportunity. And so Jesus was arrested. He was taken to the chief priests or the high priest. He was convicted, then taken to Pontius Pilate and killed. And then he was buried. We know he was buried in Joseph of Arimathea's tomb. So now we're coming to deal with the resurrection and what is going on here. So I would like us to read verses 1 to 8. And we'll start with Leicester at the back. We'll do 2 verses each. We'll go Leicester, the Bill Tammy, and then over to Tim's family. Just remember to speak up a little bit when you read.
Mark 16.
Mark 16, you get verse 1 and 2.
Now when the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Jesus, and Salome brought spices that they might come very early in the morning on the first day of the week. They came to the tomb where his son was laid.
We'll come up to Bill.
They were saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone before us from the entrance of the tomb?" Looking up, they saw that the stone had been rolled away, although it was extremely large.
And entering the tomb, they saw a young man clothed in a long white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He is risen. He's not here. See the place where they laid him."
But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going before you into Galilee. There you will see him, as he said to you. So they went out quickly and fled from the tomb, for they trembled and were amazed. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid.
Okay, so our question is, why did the women visit the tomb on the first day of the week, and what did they find when they arrived there? Before we answer that question, who came according to Mark?
To Mary,
Okay, we have Mary, the mother of James, Mary Magdalene. There's one other person. Salome. Now, we would find in the other Gospels that there were more women there than just these 3. Does that make a contradiction between Mark's account and the other ones because he left out a few women?
no, he just
Okay. Just because someone leaves out something doesn't make it a contradiction. Now, if Mark had said there were only 3 women, there were only 3, then we might be able to entertain the fact that Mark got it wrong. But when we witness things, we're going to focus on certain people, and other people might focus on other people. Luke's going to give us a fuller list. Matthew might, and John might, but Mark chose these 3, and don't ask me why he chose these 3. We know Mary Magdalene because Mary Magdalene's going to play a bigger role in the resurrection story, especially when we get to the book of John. And so, what was it? The book of Luke. Anyway, it's the other Gospels. And so we have them coming to the tomb. Why did they come to the tomb? First part of the question.
Tend to the body.
Now, why would they have wanted to come and do that? He'd already been buried since Friday evening. Why did they come to attend to the body, to anoint it with spices?
They hadn't been able to do that yet because of the timing of everything.
Okay, so Jesus died around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Remember, it was the Passover, so the Passover was about to be killed and eaten. It was being killed. It was being prepared. What day was fast arising?
Passover?
Well, the Passover was, but what day of the week was fast approaching? Mark would tell us the Sabbath day was approaching. And not only the Sabbath day, it was the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And so with that, not only was the Sabbath a regular day of rest, but according to Exodus, there was a holy convocation on that Sabbath. So it was a high Sabbath. It was a special Sabbath because it was the 7th day of the week, and it was the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which made it doubly important. But even if it wasn't the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, you weren't to do work on the Sabbath. Now, people would be buried on the Sabbath if they died and needed to be buried. But you wouldn't do extra things that didn't need to be done. You don't need to embalm a body if you're burying it in a tomb in order to bury it. It's going to be behind a stone. If you want to do things to it later, you could. You would want to do it quickly before the body starts to really decay and you really can't be in the same room with it. But Jesus had been in the tomb for about, or at least they thought, for about 30 hours. If you remember from the story of Lazarus, when Jesus came to raise Lazarus, he'd been dead 4 days. And Mary and Martha were saying, when Jesus said, roll away the stone, Lord, why are you doing that? He's going to stink. Like the body would have started decaying. And so Jesus, though, hadn't been buried that long. He hadn't been dead that long. There would have been some decay, yes. Or at least they were expecting some decay, yes. But the body hadn't been dead long enough to really do damage. Remember, Acts 2 said, your soul wasn't left in Hades, nor did your body see corruption. In other words, that was prophesied. Jesus wasn't dead long enough for his body to start decaying. And so what we have here, though, they wanted to finish the job. 3 o'clock was coming. We know in the spring, we know, like today, the sun's going to set at about 4:30. Now, this is March and April, so we're we're more northerly, so Israel being where it is, their sunset would be later even today. But sunset probably at that time is around 5:30, 6 o'clock. Jesus died at 3, but that doesn't mean he was buried at 3. Joseph of Arimathea had to go to Pilate. Pilate wasn't looking at the crucifixion. Pilate would have been in the city. So Joseph of Arimathea had to go to Pilate. Pilate had to agree. Then Joseph of Arimathea had to go back to where the crucifixion was. Then they had to wrap the body, him and Nicodemus did, and carry it off to the tomb that wasn't far away. But you could see how that could take an hour. You could see how the sun was setting, Passover was about to be eaten, and the Sabbath was about to begin. And at the end of Mark, and in the other Gospels, we are told that the women saw where Jesus was laid. They went home and quickly prepared some spices before the Sabbath began. And they were waiting till Sunday to come and anoint Jesus. Now, what did they find? What did they find?
They first saw the stone had been moved.
Okay. They asked among themselves, who's going to roll away the stone? Remember, these are women. This is not a small stone. There would be men you would need a few men to push this stone. And they were the women. Who's going to do this? Who's volunteering? I can almost see it now. Who's going to volunteer to push the stone away? And they get there and the stone's rolled away. That's a surprise. That's a surprise. What if you were coming to a tomb and you found, like today we would think, all right, we bury in the ground. If you were to come, say, if it was today, to where you were going to pay your respects to someone who had died, and you find that there's no tombstone but a hole in the ground, what would you assume? Someone had taken the body. That's what we would assume. The body's gone. We wouldn't assume, that person was raised from the dead. That's not what we would assume. So, even though Jesus had prophesied what he did, we can't come along and blame these women for thinking someone had moved the body. And especially given the circumstances around Jesus' death. The Pharisees and the Sadducees and chief priests hated Jesus. Pilate had Jesus convicted. There were so many people who could have taken Jesus' body and moved it. Perhaps the Pharisees said, well, Jesus doesn't deserve that good tomb. We're going to go take him and bury him out in the garbage heap. He doesn't deserve that. So they found that. They found the stone rolled away. Now, what else did they see when they saw that the stone had rolled away?
When they entered the tomb, see a young man sitting there.
Okay. On the right side, and they were alarmed. Now, Matthew's account says that there were two. Mark only mentions one, but remember the two in Matthew's account are on the outside. The one in Mark's account is inside. And they were afraid. Now not only are we surprised that there's a stone rolled away, we go into the tomb to investigate and there's a guy there. That would certainly frighten us. Remember, it's early in the morning, so it's not quite light outside. The sun's rising, and you're going into this dark tomb. When I get here at about 8 o'clock this morning, with the lights out, it's pretty dark in here. And so you go into a tomb, it's going to be pretty dark in there. And they see this guy. He's long robes in white, so they can see him. Surprise them. They weren't expecting him. And what did he say? Pardon me?
You guys told me not to be alarmed, looking for Jesus. Am I correct?
Yeah. Don't be alarmed. Don't be afraid. I'm not here to hurt you. You're looking for Jesus. He's not here. He's risen. And he said, go tell the disciples and Peter that he's going before you into Galilee. There's a lot about the resurrection story that there is to piece together. And I do encourage you, especially once we get through Luke and John, to actually sit down and write out everything that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John tell us about the resurrection. And once you have everything written down, then you can take a look and say, okay, how does this story, if we were to tell it once, piece together? In our podcast, when we get through John, we're in Numbers now, we will go to John after that. When we get to the study at the end of the book of John, we're going to do exactly that. Because when it comes to Jesus appearing to the women, when it comes to Jesus appearing to Mary Magdalene, Jesus appearing to the people on the road to Emmaus, the upper room, like as far as Jesus appears, and it could get we could get very easily confused. Okay, Mark said this, Luke said this, John said this, and we can run into skeptics who say, aha, contradictions, contradictions, contradictions. And if we're not careful, that can shake our faith. And really it shouldn't, but it's just that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John focus on different aspects. We don't have Jesus here appearing to the women on the road. Remember, Matthew told us that Jesus appeared to the women. Evidently, Mary Magdalene wasn't there because John has Mary Magdalene and Mark has Mary Magdalene Jesus appearing to them first, her first. Verse 9 says, now when he arose early on the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene. And the book of John would confirm that he appeared first to Mary Magdalene. And so that Mary was the first to see him, that's quite an honor. He didn't go and tell his 12 disciples first. He appeared to Mary, who was if you want to know, Mary left, told the disciples, Peter and John came, they saw the empty tomb, they left, and then Jesus appeared to Mary. And like as far as you've got to sort of piece the stuff together to recognize, okay, every gospel's telling us something slightly different. But Jesus was raised. He was raised from the dead on the first day of the week and was seen by many. Do you have something, Bill?
Yeah, you're talking about every apostle wrote differently. In studying this, I realized that Mark's Gospels of his narrating was fast.
Mm-hmm.
It was of activity.
Yes.
And there's a lot of words that he uses to make us feel like we're there. We feel
Mm-hmm.
like we're there. Like the ladies, when they went out, they fled.
Mm-hmm.
Like they took off. And it says they were trembling and astonishment had gripped them. That type of narrating, you can feel what they felt. And Mark, just because each one was different, it was because of different people, different writers.
Yeah. Matthew was very, like as far as it was drawn out, and he had a purpose, of course, relating the kingly aspects of Jesus. Luke's a historian, so it's a lot like a history book. John has his different purpose. Mark's a storyteller. And when we get into the next section of our look at Mark, we're going to see Mark is a man of action. He is showing Jesus as a person of action. And I'm going to save that for a second so that we don't run into next week's study, because that's where we'll get, the Lord willing, next week. But Jesus has been raised from the dead. That's the consistent thing. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all tell us the same story from different aspects, but Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all give us some of their own details. And John especially is going to give us the most different account of Jesus' life than the other three Gospels are. There's going to be very little in the book of John that is repeated from Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Remember, John's the last one to be written. Matthew, Mark, and Luke are already circulating. John is not, first of all, his purpose isn't the same. But he probably said, well, why am I going to repeat the story that's already out there? I'm going to give you new material that will convince you that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. And so he comes out with his material. But one thing that is consistent in all four Gospels is the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. All four of them tell that story, which should tell us, of course, that it is significant, and we know how it is significant. But so that's the first of the things that we learn from the content of Mark. Next, we learn that Jesus is portrayed as the servant of God. Mark 1 verse 1 says that Jesus is the Son of God. Chapter 2 would teach us that Jesus is the Son of Man. Matthew and Luke make this claim too, and so does John. But Mark also focuses his gospel on the fact that Jesus is a servant. Do you consider a king to be a servant, usually? No, they have servants. Now, what do we call our leaders, sometimes call our leaders today when it comes to servants? Why do people go into politics? They say that they have a calling for public service. So sometimes they refer to themselves as public servants. Now, they don't act like it a lot of the time. They act like they're out for themselves and not to serve the interests of the public. But they call themselves public servants, even though they're in positions of great power. Just because you were the king didn't mean you couldn't be a servant. And so Mark is going to relay us this. So now how does the attitude Jesus displays toward the multitudes throughout the book of Mark demonstrate his role as the servant of God? Let's go to Mark chapter 10. Mark chapter 10, and it's Casey's turn to get verse 45.
For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many.
Okay, this section begins with James and John coming to Jesus and asking a question. Grant us that we may sit on your right and left hands. They wanted positions of power. And Jesus asked them, well, are you able to drink the cup that I'm going to drink and be baptized with the baptism that I'm going to be baptized with? That's referring to his death. And they said, we're able to do that. And Jesus said, well, I believe you are able to do that. You will do that. However, I cannot give out those who can sit on my right and left hand. It's not mine to give. And then you can imagine, okay, we have 12 men. 2 of them went behind their backs to try to get the best spots. What do you think is going to happen in that group of 12? What's going to happen? So we had James and John go behind the backs of the other disciples to ask Jesus to put them in the best place on his right and left hand. When word got back to the other 10 What do you think their attitude's going to be?
Well, they'd be jealous.
Yeah.
Remember James's mother, John's mother kind of coaxed them along.
Yeah. Well, we find in I think it's Matthew's account that James and John's mother was also involved in this as well. But Jesus heard that. Now, there's going to be some anger. We know how men and women work. You know, even in kids, like as far as once you get into like the teenage age, when one person seems to be favored by the teacher, what do the other kids call that kid? The teacher's pet. They're viewed as having favors. Maybe the teacher gives them better grades. That gets people angry. Even though they may not want to be the teacher's pet, they want some of the benefits of that. They get pretty angry. And they'll probably start to bully the kid in one way or another. Well, the disciples were greatly displeased with James and John. In verses 42, starting at verse 42, Mark says, Jesus called them to himself and said, "You know that those who were considered rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. Yet it shall not be among you. You who desire to become great among you shall be your servant. And whoever desires to be first shall be slave of all," which gets us into verse 45. The reason is, I came to serve. You're not going to be greater than me when it comes to, you're not going to be, you're supposed to follow after me. You're not going to try to become proud and arrogant. God won't accept that. The Son of Man, who is going to be the Savior of the world, didn't come into this world to serve. Did Jesus deserve to be served? Yes, he did. We come together. We sometimes say we come together to worship and serve God. Jesus was God. God in the flesh. Deserved to be served. He deserved it. Yet he didn't do that. He came to serve. And so we get Jesus has this servant attitude in him. And really, Mark introduces Jesus as an adult partly for that reason. We don't see Jesus the servant when he's born in Bethlehem. We don't see Jesus the servant when he was 11 years old in the temple. It's not that he wasn't those things. He just didn't exhibit those things. Mark started Jesus at an adult, ready to begin his work following his baptism. As a perfect servant, Jesus constantly ministers to large crowds throughout this book without turning away anyone. Let's get some verses on that. We'll come to Sandy, Mark chapter 1, verses 32 to 34. Kevin can get Mark chapter 2, verse 13. We'll get, let's see. Leister, can you get, well, we'll do John 8 in a second. We'll start with you, but we'll get John 8 in a second. This is a little longer reading. Mark chapter 2, verses 32 to 34. Well, that's not right. Mark chapter 1, verses 32 and 34.
At evening, when the sun had set, they brought to him all who were sick, and those who were demon-possessed. 32 and 34.
Yeah, it's to verse 34, yes.
Then he healed many who were sick with various disease, and cast out many
All right, Jesus has just healed Peter's mother-in-law. At evening, a word got out. Jesus is here. He healed Peter's mother-in-law. It's only natural that other people came. When this vaccine is going to come out for COVID, and it's available to the general public, what are a lot of people going to do? They're going to find out where it is and go get their shot. And you'll probably, if the government doesn't do it right, have long lines because of that. Because people are saying, this vaccine that will get us out of this pandemic is here. Let's go get it. Well, Jesus is a miracle worker. He heals diseases. You didn't have modern medicine. You had to suffer through disease and maybe die. Jesus is in town. They know he heals people of their sickness. So they came to him. Now it was evening. Jesus could have said, I'm tired. I want to go to bed. Because Jesus did get tired. He did need to sleep. His body was a body like everyone else's. We don't sleep because we're human. Necessarily because we're human. We sleep because our bodies need it. That was how God created us. And so Jesus could have said, you need to go away. I need to sleep. I got some things to do tomorrow. I need to go out and preach. I'm going to go out and journey. And so, but he didn't do that. They were lined out the door. And he healed those who were sick. He served the people. Mark chapter 2, verse 13. All right. This time not miracles, this time teaching. Multitudes came. Well, Jesus used that opportunity as well. It's fine if you want to teach among 10, 20 people. It's much better to teach among more people than that. You can get the message out. They can go tell their friends, you need to come hear Jesus. He's got words that you need to hear concerning eternal life. You need to come hear Jesus. Jesus acted as a servant not only to people's physical needs, but to their spiritual needs as well. Let's go to Mark chapter 8. We're going to get verses 1 to 10. We will read 2 verses each, starting with Leicester. Mark chapter 8, verses 1 to 10. Mark 8, verses 1 to 10. And you can get verses 1 and 2, Leicester. Verse 2 as well.
I have compassion on this multitude, because they have not committed with me 3 days and I did nothing to this.
But send them away hungry to their homes, they will faint on the way. And some of them have come from a great distance. His disciples answered him, where will anyone be able to find enough bread here in this desolate place to satisfy these people?
He asked them, how many loaves do you have? And they said 7. So he commanded the multitude to sit down on the ground, and he took the 7 loaves and gave thanks, broke them, and gave them to his disciples to set before them. And they set them before the multitude.
They also had a few small fish, and having blessed them, he said to set them also before them. So they ate and were filled, and they took up 7 large baskets of leftover fragments.
Now those who had eaten were about 4,000, and he sent them away. Immediately got into the boat with his disciples and came to the region of Manusa.
All right. So we call this the feeding of the 4,000. Matthew makes it clear that there are women and children here who are not counted in that number. But there's a lot of people. If you don't know, let me go back over here. Let's go back to our maps. We're here. This is the region that Jesus is teaching here in Decapolis. It's not a lot over here. There's a lot of mountains over here on this side of the Sea of Galilee. I guess not down there. Sorry, we're up here. Not in Decapolis, but I don't know what I did there. It's Beth Araba. We're up here. So he's here. There's not a lot. On the west side of the Sea of Galilee, notice there's a lot of cities. But on the east side, there's a lot of mountains. And so, not a lot of cities there. It's a deserted place. So you have about 4,000 people. Jesus has been teaching with them for 3 days. These people weren't expecting Jesus to be teaching for 3 days and healing those who were sick. They weren't expecting there to be 3 days. Now, they might have brought provisions for a day, maybe even 2 days, but not 3. So if Jesus had sent them away, they would come to Bethsaida over here. But the city of Bethsaida is not going to have, we think, oh, well, come to Toronto, there'll be restaurants for everybody. The city of Bethsaida is not going to be able to support 4,000 people. So those people would have to cross the Sea of Galilee, the Jordan River, and maybe some of them stop in Bethsaida, and then we get over here to the next city, and then the next city, and the next city. And if those people don't get to be at home, if they've got to come all the way over to here maybe, they're going to faint along the way. And Jesus knew that. Jesus didn't feed these people because he was teaching some gospel that, some social gospel, where people came and they were fed, and as a byproduct, they heard the gospel. We don't do that because we don't find examples of that. However, Jesus took compassion on these people because there was a need. He taught them, and there was a need. They were going to faint. Jesus showed mercy. And that's the type of servant Jesus was. He fed these people. He had power over disease. He had the power to forgive sins. He was Lord of the Sabbath. He could cast out demons. He had the power over nature, the power over death. He was the ultimate servant. And that's the example Christ wants us to follow. We don't have the power over those things, but we can do what Jesus wants us to do and be a servant in his kingdom.
I'm not ashamed to own my Lord.